They called me Heartless. My own parents, the people who raised me, stood on my porch with storm cloud faces and trembling hands like they had rehearsed this ambush. Their words were daggers dressed in disappointment. You chose a vacation over family. My name is Ethan Hale, I'm 32. And if you think family guilt is just a subtle thing, let me show you what it looks like when it turns into a weapon. That morning was supposed to be ordinary, coffee brewing, the quiet hum of my anniversary gifts still wrapped on the table. But the knock on the door was volcanic. When I opened it, there they were, Mom gripping a manila envelope, Dad hovering behind her like an echo, both faces sharp with judgment. You owe us, Mom said flatly, thrusting the envelope at me. Since you refused to help when your sister needed you, we had no choice but to hire professional childcare. Do you know how much that cost? Thousands. That's on you. Her words echoed inside my chest. A part of me wanted to laugh, another part wanted to slam the door. Instead, I stood silent, letting their accusations gather like storm clouds over a still ocean. I remembered the weeks before, the guilt-tripping phone calls, the passive-aggressive texts, the way they treated my wedding anniversary as disposable compared to my sister's weekend getaway. Family comes first, Mom had hissed into the phone. And when I refused, the label came quick, selfish, heartless. Now, standing at my own front door, their demand wasn't just for money, it was for obedience. They wanted me to bend, to carry their manufactured shame like a second skin. I could feel the anniversary trip replaying in my head. My wife's laughter under the string lights of a quiet coastal town, our first real getaway in years, the way we held hands and let the world fade. I had chosen her, chosen us. And for that, I was guilty in their court. My father finally spoke, his voice low but edged with something sharp. Family sacrifices, Ethan. That's what a real man does. You're going to pay these bills. End of story. His words hit me harder than I expected. Real man. Sacrifices. As if my devotion to my wife somehow disqualified me from being their son. I looked at them, really looked. Their faces weren't filled with pain, but with entitlement. Not grief but control. And in that realization something shifted. My silence wasn't surrender, it was fuel. I inhaled once, steady. Then I opened my mouth. And the words that left me carried a weight they had never heard from me before, words that froze them mid-breath, left their eyes wide and their posture broken. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I don't owe you a damn cent, I said, slow and clear, each word carrying the weight of 2 months of swallowed silence. Their faces flickered. Mom's lips parted as if to launch another tirade, but the shock held her still. Dad's brows knitted, searching for authority he no longer had. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the gap between us, my voice calm but steady, like a verdict being read. You chose to hire a babysitter. You signed those checks. That wasn't my decision. That was yours. And you don't get to hand me the bill for choices you made to punish me. The envelope trembled in Mom's hand. You're ungrateful, she whispered, almost choking on the word. We raised you to understand family obligations. We taught you sacrifice. Sacrifice. The word rolled in my head like rusted machinery. I thought about the years of missed birthdays, the weekends spent fixing things at my sister's house, the countless do this for family calls. And how every time I sacrificed it was met with silence, until I said no. Then suddenly I was the villain. You didn't teach me sacrifice, I said, my voice firmer now. You taught me submission. You taught me that my time, my marriage, my happiness were less important than keeping my sister comfortable. That's not family, that's control. Dad's face reddened, the vein in his temple pulsing. Watch yourself, Ethan. You're crossing a line. I met his glare. No, Dad. You crossed it years ago. Every time you made me feel like a stand-in parent for her kids instead of your son. Every time you looked at me and saw an obligation, not a man building his own life. That line? You painted it. I'm just refusing to stand on it anymore. The neighborhood felt too quiet. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower buzzed faintly, but here on my porch the world had gone still, like even the air wanted to listen. Mom's voice cracked. So you're really just going to let your sister drown? Leave us with no help? That's who you've become. I shook my head slowly. No. That's who you tried to make me. The difference is, I finally learned that help doesn't mean bankrupting myself emotionally or financially to prop up someone who refuses to grow. If my sister needs a babysitter, she can budget for one like every other adult in the world. Their silence deepened. For the first time in my life, they had no retort ready, no guilt-soaked parable to throw at me. Just stunned faces staring at a son they couldn't bend anymore. And in that pause, sharp and electric, I felt something new seep into me. Not rebellion. Not anger. Something quieter but heavier. Freedom. They left that morning with nothing but silence trailing behind them. I watched their car pull away, the manila envelope still clutched in my mother's fist, her knuckles white as bone. For years I had imagined what it would feel like to stand my ground, and now that I had, the air around me felt different, charged like the static before a storm. Inside, the house was still warm with the scent of coffee. My wife touched my arm lightly, her eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" she asked. I wasn't sure how to answer. I had spent a lifetime being trained to bend, trained to swallow my own needs to serve theirs. Saying no wasn't just a decision, it was a rupture. "I think so," I whispered. But the truth was heavier. I felt both liberated and guilty, like a man who had finally broken free of chains only to notice the scars they left behind. Over the next week, the silence from my parents grew louder than their accusations had ever been. No phone calls. No texts. Not even from my sister. I expected rage, threats, manipulation. Instead, there was nothing. It was as if my refusal had short-circuited their entire script. But freedom has its own weight. At night, I'd replay their faces, the disbelief in my mother's eyes, the fury in my father's. The words heartless and selfish echoed in my chest like ghosts. Even when you know you're right, cutting ties with family feels like sawing through bone. One evening, my wife and I sat on the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in bruised oranges. She held my hand and said, "You know, Ethan, sometimes standing up for us means standing apart from them. You chose us, and that's not selfish. That's love." Her words sank deeper than I admitted. And just when I thought the storm had passed, another knock came at my door. This time it wasn't silence waiting on the other side. The knock came late, too late for it to be casual. It rattled through the house, sharp and deliberate. My wife glanced at me, her hand tightening around mine. I already knew. When I opened the door, it wasn't both of them this time. It was my father alone, shoulders squared, jaw set, like he'd rehearsed this confrontation. He didn't bother with greetings. He stepped onto the porch and held out a crumpled piece of paper. "This is the bill," he said flatly. "Your mother's too upset to come back. We've covered it for now, but you'll make this right." The paper shook in his hand, not from nerves but from the force he used to keep his temper caged. I didn't even look at the numbers. I stared at him instead, at the man who had spent my whole life reminding me what I supposedly owed. I folded my arms. "I told you already. I don't owe you anything." His eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint flashing. "You're my son. That means something. Blood isn't optional." I felt my chest tighten, but not with fear, with resolve. "Blood doesn't give you the right to run my life, Dad. You don't get to dictate my marriage, my time, or my wallet. Not anymore." For a moment the mask cracked. His nostrils flared, his jaw twitched. "You've changed," he spat. I met his glare evenly. "No. I've stopped pretending." Silence stretched between us, the kind that feels like it could shatter glass. Finally he shoved the paper against my chest, but I let it fall to the porch. His footsteps thundered as he stormed away, the night swallowing him whole. I bent down, picked up the bill, and stared at the absurd total scrawled across it. Thousands of dollars. All because I dared to prioritize my own life. And in that moment I realized this wasn't about money at all. It was about control. And I had just broken it. The bill sat on my kitchen counter like a threat wrapped in paper. Every time I passed it, I felt the weight of what it symbolized, not money but a demand for control. My wife finally folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. "Out of sight," she said softly. "Don't let them live rent-free in here," tapping my chest. For a while her words worked. Days stretched into a rhythm, work, dinner, quiet evenings. But underneath I knew it wasn't over. My parents had never accepted silence as an answer. They thrived on confrontation, on cornering me until I caved. It came faster than I expected. My phone buzzed late one night, my sister's name flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came sharp, dripping with accusation. "How could you do this to Mom and Dad? They're drowning in debt because of you. You ruined their health, their peace, everything. All because you're too selfish to give up a weekend." Her words were rehearsed, fed to her line by line. I stayed quiet, letting her burn through the script until her fury sputtered. Then I said the only thing that mattered: "They're your kids. Not mine." The silence on her end was deafening, as though she'd never considered that truth before. But she recovered fast, spitting venom. "You'll regret this. They won't forget." I hung up. My hands shook, not from fear but from release. For the first time I realized they couldn't hurt me without my permission. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Heavy cream paper, my father's handwriting jagged with rage. It wasn't just a demand anymore. It was an ultimatum. And in that moment I knew, the fight had only just begun. The letter was short, but every line carried venom. You will take responsibility for what you've caused. If you refuse, don't expect us to stand by you when you need us. Family loyalty isn't optional. My wife read it over my shoulder, her jaw tightening. This isn't love, she whispered. It's blackmail. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it on the table beside the untouched babysitter bill. Together they looked less like family matters and more like evidence in a case against me. The next morning I called my father. My voice was calm, my resolve anchored. I got your letter, I said. I need you to hear me clearly. I'm done paying the price for decisions that aren't mine. If you think threatening me will work, you don't know me anymore. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply said, "You'll regret this," and hung up. But I didn't regret it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on my own foundation, not the one they built for me out of guilt and fear. Weeks passed. My parents stopped showing up. My sister went silent. The storm that had once circled me daily seemed to retreat. At night, I lay awake listening to the quiet, waiting for the next strike. But none came. Until one evening, a knock echoed through the house again. My wife and I exchanged a look, sharp, wary. I opened the door expecting more accusations. Instead, it was my mother alone, eyes red, hands trembling, not with rage this time but something else. She stepped inside slowly as if the floor might collapse beneath her. Her voice broke the silence. "Ethan, we can't afford the sitter anymore. Your sister, she's blaming us. She says it's our fault she's drowning." She looked at me like she expected rescue. But all I could think was, this was the collapse of the very control they had built. She stood in my living room like a shadow of herself, hair disheveled, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. My mother, the same woman who once hurled the word heartless at me, now looked fragile, almost broken. "They've turned on us," she whispered, staring at the floor. "Your sister says we ruined her life. That we should have forced you harder. She doesn't even bring the kids over anymore. She says we're useless." For a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. But pity wasn't the same as forgiveness. I thought about the years of manipulation, the guilt, the endless demands that left me drained and hollow. Now, the very system they built, the hierarchy where my needs were disposable, was eating them alive. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So now you know how it feels. To be blamed for someone else's choices." Her face lifted, eyes glassy. "Ethan, please, we're your parents. We didn't mean." I cut her off, my voice low but steady. "You meant every word. Every accusation. Every time you called me selfish for daring to live my life. You built this. And now it's crumbling." The silence pressed between us. She looked smaller, diminished, as though she'd aged 10 years in front of me. For once I didn't rush to soften the blow. I let the truth sit heavy. Finally she whispered, "So that's it? You're just going to let us fall apart?" I thought of my wife, of the trip we'd taken, of the freedom I'd tasted. I thought of the nights I lay awake, suffocated by guilt they planted in me. And then I answered, "I'm not letting you fall apart. I'm just refusing to be the glue you used to hold together what was never mine to fix." Her lips trembled, words failing her. She turned toward the door, shoulders slumped, and for the first time in my life, my mother left without having the last word. The night after my mother left, the house was wrapped in an unfamiliar stillness. No buzzing phone, no pounding on the door, no envelopes filled with demands. Just quiet. For the first time in months I felt the weight lifting, not because they had forgiven me but because I no longer needed their permission to live my life. The next morning I made coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The sun was climbing, warm light spilling across the yard. My wife joined me, leaning against the railing, her hand brushing mine. "You look lighter," she said softly. I thought about her words, about the journey from that first accusation to this moment. I realized the guilt I had carried for decades was not mine. It had been planted, watered, and forced to grow by people who mistook control for love. And for the first time I had cut it at the root. Later that week, another letter came in the mail. I didn't open it. I placed it beside the others in a drawer, each one a relic of battles I no longer had to fight. They could write their ultimatums, their accusations, their threats. But those words had no power without my belief in them. Standing in my kitchen, the morning light catching the edges of the unopened envelope, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. I finally understood that family isn't defined by guilt or obligation or the debts they invent. Family is built on choice, on love freely given, not demanded. I chose my wife. I chose my marriage. I chose myself. And in doing so, I hadn't lost anything. I had simply released the illusion that I owed my life to people who only saw me as a resource. That realization was my freedom. That was my justice. I poured another cup of coffee, the silence wrapping around me like armor. And as the sun climbed higher, I let the weight of their voices fade until there was nothing left but peace.